Hello and welcome to another Zack Carnage video, and this time we are going to be doing some more Necron tactics. We're going to be discussing the pros and cons of playing Tomb Blades and Destroyers. Now this is somewhat of a general video, so there's not going to be a lot of statistical analysis in this video, but we are going to be doing some pretty in-depth comparisons of what the units can do. Obviously there are a lot of possibilities open to it. But we're just going to be doing a bit of a generic talk about these two units. So here we can see a little sheet of just some generic information about the two different units, and specifically things which differ between the two. So to start off, we're going to be looking at this from the perspective of a player who wants to build a Decurion. The main reason for that is that the Decurion is the probably one of the most competitive forms of lists that you can build for your Necron army. So that's the reason why we're going to look at this initially from this point. So to start off, you need to think about what formations you can actually take these units in. The Destroyers can only be taken in a Destroyer cult, whereas the Tomb Blades can only be taken in the Reclamation Legion. Now the Reclamation Legion is a requirement of your Decurion, so you will actually have to take Tomb Blades. So for the purposes of building a Decurion army, it's not a choice of between the Tomb Blades and Destroyers as much as where you want to put most of the points, because you could just take one unit of the Tomb Blades and then lots of Destroyers, or you could take no Destroyers and lots of Tomb Blades, or maybe you want to build one of the combined arms detachments instead of a Decurion, in which case, ignore this section, but we'll get on to the rest as well. So to start off, taking the Destroyers in your Destroyer cult will give them rerolls to any wounds and armor penetration that they get when they are shooting. This is really key because they are a shooty unit. Necrons are traditionally a shooty army, although we have seen some pretty impressive close combat stuff come out of the recent codices. So yeah, the Destroyers have always been famed for their ability to blast through stuff, specifically Space Marines, thanks to their weapon choices. So having the rerolls to wound and armor penetration is actually very, very key, especially seeing as you're working with glancing weapons, because you're using Gorse, so rerolling for that armor penetration is very, very useful, seeing as you need to get your 6s. To glance against the armor. However, the Destroyers are very expensive. In fact, taking a Destroyer cult can probably cost the majority of the points in your army, just because of the fact that in order to play the Destroyer cult, you'll have to take your units of Destroyers as completely full, and they're already a pricey model set. However, they don't have a lot of upgrades that you need to buy for them, so they're pretty much prepared. They come straight out of the packet and work immediately. Think of them a bit like a ready meal, basically, as far as your Necrons are concerned. Whereas the Tomb Blades are much more customizable. Their additional effects that actually matter for them, if you put them in the Reclamation Legion, of course, is that they get the reroll of the reanimation protocols when they are close to the Overlord. This is something which doesn't matter hugely, because they're probably not going to be very close to the Overlord a lot. However, we will discuss a slight tactical trick which you could employ involving that for quite a while. So then moving on to some of the other other differences between them. So the Destroyers have 2 wounds as they currently stand, with a 3+ armor save, whereas the Tomb Blades only have 1 wound with a 4+ armor save. So clearly at this point we're saying that Destroyers are more than twice as survivable as the Tomb Blades. Plus you can obviously regenerate those wounds in both cases, so there's not really a huge problem there. They're both very survivable units, with the Destroyers just being quite a bit more survivable. However, they do then end up costing double the amount, pretty much. They're slightly more than double initially, but after you start putting in your extras on your Tomb Blades, they even out to pretty much double the initial value. And they also get the bonus of Preferred Enemy, because they are absolutely crazy and insane, hence bolting themselves to flying platforms. And they have Gorse Cannons, which is the Space Marine can opener, so that's Heavy 2 AP3. Don't worry too much about Heavy 2 for now. The AP3 is really the important thing. Plus the fact that these are shooting 24 inches, so you're firing a 24-inch weapon twice, on a unit which is actually a jetpack unit. So there's a lot of incredible stuff that you can do with this unit. And after you force those Marines to pile out of those Rhinos or Land Raiders or whatever they're in, provided you're going up against basic Marines or anything worse, you're going to really tear them to shreds, because AP3 is an absolutely fantastic stat to go against Marine players. Things that are worse than Marines obviously are going to suffer even more, but then they probably have their points invested in other ways. And in this case, your AP3 weapons then essentially are not as cost effective, because you don't want to be wasting points on weapons to penetrate armor, which is better than what you have to penetrate. You know, if you can get away with an AP4 weapon against, say, Tyranids, because they might be running just a lot of stuff with very low armor saves, or high armor saves, however you want to think about it, then in that case, you know, is it really worth putting your points into an AP3 weapon? So it does depend on what you're going up against. If you don't know initially, AP3 is still a pretty solid statistic, because you are likely to go against a lot of Marine players. Marine armies are very common, and you know, there's a lot of different variants of them. So there's really no issue with picking an AP3 weapon as your standard choice for your mass killing unit. Whereas the Tomb Blades, less of a killing unit, they can run the twin-linked Gorse Blasters. They do have a couple of other weapon choices, which we'll go through in a bit, but the Gorse Blasters are the generic one. So these are rapid-fire AP4 weapons, meaning you aren't going to tear Marines to shreds. In fact, you're going to do very little to Marines themselves. However, say you go up against Tower Fire Warriors, they're going to be putty in your fingers. The fact that these are twin-linked is very useful. However, they are rapid-fire, so that does mean that at full range, 24 inches, you're not going to be able to get double the shots off as you would with your destroyers. So then we move on to the unit type analysis. So destroyers are currently jetpack units, which means that they are subject to deep strike, which is actually very useful for contesting objectives, plus you can put them in a position where they can rip apart another unit. However, do you want to keep them out of the game, is the question. Relentless means that they can instantly fire their heavy 2 weapons, even though they're moving, which is fantastic. And because they're jetpacks, because they're a jetpack unit, they are subject to the jump, shoot, jump, which we saw Tau players doing a lot of in recent formats, where you sit behind a building, you jump out, you fire away some shots, and then jump back, which is a very actually versatile and destructive method of killing your opponents, because it protects your units and keeps your points alive for as long as possible. However, the Tomb Blades, being jet bikes, then have Jink, which is actually incredibly useful, just because it makes them more survivable than you would initially think, having only 1 wound and 4+ armor save. They are relentless as well. Although this doesn't come into it enormously, it's still a useful point to make. They do have Hammer of Wrath, so they are capable of assaulting. However, assaulting is really a choice that you can make. I think overall this is something which actually gives the Tomb Blades a reasonable benefit, because being initiative 2 is a serious problem for all of the Necrons. And then the Turbo Boost, 24 inches, is probably the highlight of this unit. The fact that they can move so incredibly quickly across the battlefield is really where they shine. Then we move on to the optional upgrades. As I said before, the destroyers pretty much come as a standard set. You're not going to do an awful lot of change to them. However, you can upgrade them to the heavy Gorse Cannon variant, so you actually have a heavy destroyer, like I have here. And that does give you a little bit of anti-tank or anti-incredibly strong creature or anti-hero or whatever you want to call it element. These will be firing 36 inches, so you get an extra little bit of range. They're at strength 9 and AP3, AP2, sorry, I think I should say. So they should be able to easily wreck a Rhino or something if you can get a few shots in. However, the Tomb Blades, their options are that you can stick with the twin-linked Gorse Cannons, Gorse Blasters, or you can move on to Tesla Carbines. If you want to know how I feel about Tesla Carbines, then you should see my previous video talking about the Immortals and the Deathmarks. I generically, I think that the Gorse Blasters are better, simply because they are more versatile in that they are useful against both vehicles and infantry. And you don't know what you're going up against before you put in your army. So I think that the Gorse is generally slightly better. However, if you know what army you're going against, these two might be favored because Tesla carbines are traditionally very good against mobs because you get that extra hits in, and the same thing for particle beamers actually, because that high strength of 6 AP5 is can be an issue, but they are blast weapons. So really, these are ideal for going against very weak little blobs of creatures that you need to blast off the table. Like, say your opponent has I don't know, so just some enormous amount of incredibly weak creatures, and you just need to tear holes out of them, because if you're firing with your destroyers, you're only going to be able to kill so many in a turn, whereas a blast can do quite a significant amount of damage. Then you can also give them the shield veins upgrade, putting them up to 3+ armor save. Some people like this idea, some people don't. I think generally it's a useful thing. However, I wouldn't always use it, because to me, Tomb Blades can often be a throwaway unit or a tactically contestive unit. So shield veins are not a priority for me. I would rather use the Jinx save in addition to cover and things like that to help them. And that is where the Shadow Loom comes in. A Shadow Loom will give you +1 cover save. So that can be used to improve your Jink, or to just improve your cover save as you're moving across the board, which can be very, very useful overall. And you can also give them a Nebula Scope. And the classic combo is to use the Nebula Scope with the Particle Beamer, so that you can do blasts ignoring cover, which is actually very useful, because cover is everywhere in the modern game of 40k. So we've seen a couple of things that define these two units separately, and now we're going to talk about a few of the things that they can do tactically. So we start off looking at a very basic terrain board. Here we can see this is something that the board might look like. This is the long table edge, traditionally 6 foot long, and then the 4 foot long here. And these 4 boxes are just pieces of line of sight breaking terrain, so just generic buildings or something that have broken up the table a bit, just to add a little bit of flavor. And this is the idea behind the jump shoot jump tactic that you can apply to your destroyer models. Because they are jetpacks, you can move out during the movement phase, fire off your shots provided the enemy is within the 24-inch range of these cannons, unless of course you're using heavy Gauss cannons, in which case you can go for 36-inch range, and then you move back. This is generally a pretty useful tactic, because if your opponent is anywhere on this edge, in this center area, or potentially closing in around here, maybe, you should be able to fire shots off at them, definitely on this edge with your destroyers at this point. Plus, you'll always be able to move up and then make your jump here, that jump being a 2d6 thrust move during the assault phase. So you can use that in order to further advance along the field. So if you really need to go and grab objectives, you can move, fire off some shots, and then keep moving towards the objective without feeling like you're under too much pressure. However, it's mainly used as a defensive tactic, in that you would move out, fire off your shots, and then jump back in order to avoid return fire, which is actually very useful because of the fact that Warhammer 40k is a turn-based game. If you can protect your units as well as dealing some damage, you will generally see point profit in terms of what you want to do. So say you're using a 40-point model, if you can every turn do, say, 10 points of damage, and you're going for, say, a 5-turn game, that's overall point profit, which is what you want to do, provided you can look after this unit here. So that's just something to consider. But then you can also think about this other little idea relating to the Tomb Blades, and this is what I am dubbing the Turbo Contest move. So because of the incredible movement of a jet bike, you have the 12-inch movement in the movement phase, plus an additional 24-inch turbo boost provided you're not doing any shooting. So it's essentially their run move that they have. And the great thing about this is that wherever you put your Tomb Blades, so here we have a TB representing the Tomb Blades, you have a 36-inch range movement all the way around, which you can use. Plus, because they're jet bikes, they just move straight over the terrain, so you can pretty much ignore everything. So what you can do is, say you wanted to put the, say you know that the objectives are in a certain area, all you have to do is put the Tomb Blades at some point such that this little bubble, which I call it, this contest bubble, contains those objectives, and then at some point during the game, say you aren't going to be able to hold an objective and you're definitely going to lose it, then what you do is on the final turn you just turbo boost out and you sit on that objective and you contest it, and that way you don't lose points advantage. So in this case, this is one of the few units which I'm talking about not in terms of points effectiveness, not in terms of how much killing power they can put out per points that you spend on the model. This is more of a how many points can you win in the game. This is about the victory points. This is about actually winning the game as opposed to wiping out your opponents. Because as you may have seen in my Praetorian Lich Guard video and my Deathmark Immortal video, a lot of my analysis is focused on games where you purge your entire enemy army. And this is a unit which I feel is not designed to kill, but is designed to be tactically useful and is designed to contest objectives, and that is something that pretty much all jet bikes can do, and it's really something that the Necrons have needed for a while, or did need for a while until these little guys were introduced. So this is absolutely fantastic. And just for a sense of how much you can actually move. So this bubble has a radius of 36 inches. That means it's a 72-inch diameter contesting bubble. So putting them in the middle, you actually have full width of the board from wherever they are. Obviously, if you put them in the middle, you might find it difficult to reach the outer corners. I haven't actually bothered to calculate that. I'm sure that would be very easy. We could just use Pythagoras to do that. But I suspect that, what you want to do is put them somewhere along the middle, preferably with a lot of cover, if you can find that, and then you can zip over to any of the places where you need to be in later turns in order to contest the objectives. And this comes back to the point about the fact that these are in the Reclamation Legion formation, because models in that formation get the bonus that if they fail a reanimation protocol roll with a 1, you can re-roll that, provided you're within 12 inches of your Overlord. Now, because you want to distribute this amongst as many of your units as possible, putting your Overlord in the middle or anywhere in the middle region is probably preferable, so that you have a 12-inch ring around them, because let's say we put the Overlord over here, then they would only have half the bubble of reanimation protocol protection, whereas if you put them here, they will of course have that full bubble. So it is generally better to put the Overlord somewhere closer to the middle, although not preferably in the middle, because you don't want to be wiped off the board immediately, because Slay the Warlord is actually a fairly big deal in some games. But, think of the possible ways that you could use this Overlord to boost up your Tomb Blades wherever you put them, but you could always just put them in the middle, protected by some cover, and then zip them out when they need to, in order to contest an objective. So I started this video with the idea of that you were essentially pitting the Destroyers and the Tomb Blades against each other and deciding which one is ultimately the best unit. But they both do very different things, although they may be considered to both act as something of just a fast-moving, hard-hitting unit. They actually do very different things. The Destroyers move quite a bit slower than the Tomb Blades. That they deliver a lot more firepower, which is specifically designed basically to kill Marines or Marine equivalents, and they do that exceptionally well, so there is really no reason to put them down. I think they're an excellent unit, except for the points cost values. So, provided you have the space and the budget available to pay for Destroyers, I think they are an absolutely fantastic unit, and I would take them over so much else in the Codex. These guys are absolutely wonderful to play with, as well as to look at. They've always been one of the most inspiring and interesting looking models that the Necron army has to offer. So I really think that if you can afford it, you should pick up the models and fit them into your army, because they are absolutely fantastic. Moving on to the Tomb Blades, of course these are a requirement for your Decurion if that is the type of army that you wish to play. Of course you can obviously play a combined arms detachment and not play them, but I do think that running them in a Decurion is really, really key. Preferably 2 or 3 units in order to contest as many objectives as possible, but if you are only 1 unit, trying to keep them out of the line of fire. Putting them in the middle can be a bit of a problem if they're going to absorb a lot of shots. However, These guys are surprisingly survivable. They often absorb more shots than you would expect. However, they're not going to absorb, say, as many as Lich Guards with their shields. So keep that in mind. Don't think of these guys as complete weaklings, but they are quite a lot weaker than, say, Destroyers or some of the tougher units in your army. As always, thanks for watching this video. If you have any comments or suggestions that you would like to make, don't forget you can leave those in the comment section down below. I love hearing from you guys, and if you want to dispute anything that I've said in this video, feel free to go ahead. Everyone has their own opinion on how a unit should be used. I'm just here to try and give you some ideas of how they could be used. I don't in any way think that my ideas are definitively right or wrong. So yeah, don't forget to like this video. Even if you didn't enjoy it, you should like it anyway, because then more people will watch it so we can have more arguments. That's the way to think about it if you disagree with my points completely. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you're interested in Yu-Gi-Oh videos, I'm now putting my weekly outs deck profiles on the Yu-Gi-Oh channel, so go ahead and check that out. There's some information about that in my previous upload. But I'm also going to be doing some epic duel videos, just some editing on those in the coming week or so. So stay tuned for that, and also expect a battle report for the Necrons coming up very soon. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.